Hello, I am Chandu Nair, handling the course on marketing management. Now we will talk about managing marketing channels. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand what is the meaning, nature and function of distribution channels, the different types of distribution channels out there, how to choose various channels for one's products, the channel design decision, the criteria for selection, what are the roles being played by different folks, and the methods of resolving channel conflict. Now, first and foremost, it's important therefore to understand what exactly is a distribution channel. As you know, on the one side you have the manufacturer or the provider, and at the other end you have the customer. So therefore, there is a system of relationships that exists among businesses that participate in the business of buying and selling products and services with the ultimate goal of serving the end customer. So in short, system of relationships on the one side between the provider and the other end the customer, and this interaction between the system of relationships to serve the customer better. Now, why do they have such intermediaries? Because there is a certain value that they add to the entire value chain between the provider and the consumer. And many times this happens because there is either a location gap or there is a time gap or both. Now, these are two major things that happen because of intermediaries. Now, therefore, let us look at the kind of activities that such intermediaries play, because then only one understands the need for such channels. There are what I would call the primary activities and the secondary activities. The primary activities would include things like inbound logistics, in some cases even manufacturing, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, provision of services, which come under the primary sets of activities, and in the secondary set of activities things like procurement, technology development, firm infrastructure and human resource management. Now, these are all, as you can make out, pretty important activities, and the intermediaries that are involved in the provision of such activities or products or inputs actually play quite a key role. And what kind of role is dependent on the kind of company that you have. For example, somebody like Nike, which is the world's premier brand of footwear and other associated sportswear, you will find that Nike does not have any manufacturing facilities of its own across the world. Yet it happens to be a very large player in, say, shoes. How does this happen? Because obviously you have various types of intermediaries at various stages playing a role. Now, a critical thing that happens because of the proper use of intermediaries is that the communication between the end customer and the manufacturer can be drastically reduced. So, intermediaries can play a very powerful role in ensuring very appropriate and timely communication between the manufacturer and provider on the one side and the consumer and buyer on the other side. So, if you look at it, there is at the very simple stage, there is the direct channel, which is producer directly to the consumers, or there can be indirect channel, which is producer to the intermediaries and finally to the customer. Let us take a look at this in a little more detail. You have various types of intermediaries out there, especially if you are looking at it from on the sales side. You have broadly two categories. One, the wholesaler, distributor on the one side and the retailer, and the difference between them and the next category is that these people actually take the title to the goods as they pass through the channel, each channel. Suppose it is going from the producer to the wholesaler to the retailer. At each stage, for example, the ownership transfers from the producer to the wholesaler, again from the wholesaler to the retailer. Then you have on the other side people who are called agents or brokers. Now, in their case, they actually act as sometimes as essentially representatives of the producer, and therefore they do not actually take title or ownership of the goods. The various types of retailers today too have seen a transformation, especially in India. And if you look at it globally, you have various types of retailers. You have huge departmental stores on the one side, you have supermarkets, you have discount shops, or sometimes what they call category killers, in Bangalore, for example, you have Metro, a German huge store, which comes down and gives things at a very low price. Then you have specialty shops, people who focus on a particular category, very common you might see in certain types of, say, building materials or certain specialty products. Or you have convenience stores, you might even call them, the local mom and shop grocery store or the kirana. Or you have some various mandis and markets, cash and carry warehouses, and there are also in some places things like, specialty things like catalog showrooms. So there's a bunch of retailers out there, and actually things are getting transformed even as we speak. There you could also have online retailing happening. Now, why should a company want to have channels, and what should be the objectives of the channel? Now, the key thing is, what is my overall market positioning? What is it that I want the customer to see me and my product as? That's very important. Now, that determines the choice of channel that you have. For example, if I'm selling a very high-end watch, then I need to be sure that the kind of person who's finally retailing that particular product represents that particular brand. For example, if it's a Rolex watch, I must be sure that the experience that the customer has at the point of purchase is consistent with the distinctive prestige oriented nature of the Rolex watch. So, as you can make out, there is a very significant impact that the channel can play, but there is a need to choose the right channel. There are three main options there for any marketer. One, whether to look at intensive distribution, that is all over the place, for products like detergents, soaps, shampoos, food items, etc., etc. You will find that there will be a lot of distribution, especially things which are consumed very often. Second is exclusive distribution, like I mentioned about Rolex, or maybe very high-end cars. You may not have too many of them even within a country. Or very selective distribution. You may have it for certain, categories of, say, paints or building materials, that you have it selectively in certain places because it might require certain amount of, explanation or education or whatever else. So there are various options open to a marketer, and depends on how he chooses it based on the overall position of that product. So, like we have seen earlier, there are places where there are completely zero levels of distribution channels present, which is a direct thing, or there could be one level or two or three or four levels. So the number of intermediaries can multiply. In certain agri commodities, for example, there could be a buying agent right at the farm level, and then it goes to the mandi, then from the mandi it might go to a wholesaler, it might go to a city wholesaler who then supplies it to retailers, and then it comes down to the customer. So there can be many variants to this, and it's important for you as a budding marketer or a current marketer, just do this exercise, take various product categories and try and map out the marketing channels, see whether you can even identify all of them. You'll be surprised, sometimes you may not see one or two of them.